Throughout the 60 plus years of Doctor Who, the Doctor has almost always travelled the universe with a companion, sharing in the joyous wonders of exploring through time and space. Now, as you can imagine, there's been quite a lot of people to actually travel with the Doctor, but I want to discuss the companions that are often and quite easily forgotten. So join me as I take a look and discuss the most forgotten companions in Doctor Who.
I'm the Doctor.
Fantastic. I reverse the polarity of the neutron flow.
Have you ever thought what it's like to be wanderers in the fourth dimension?
Now, I'm not going to be including any companions that have appeared throughout many different forms of expanded media, whether that be on audio, in comics, or just in books in general. I'm only going to be focusing on those on-screen companions. But before we get into discussing my picks, be sure to subscribe to the channel, that way you can never miss a video. So, without further ado, let's get into the list. Adam Mitchell. Adam Mitchell, played by Bruno Langley, was introduced in the episode Dalek, where he was a researcher with a high-level IQ who worked for Henry Van Statten, and was responsible for coming up with information about alien artifacts that had been acquired by Mr. Van Statten. He came to travel with the Doctor in his 9th incarnation, after the Doctor had traced an alien distress signal to an underground museum in Utah in the year 2012, owned by wealthy billionaire and collector of alien artifacts, Henry Van Statten. However, the Doctor soon discovered that Henry Van Statten's only living specimen in his museum was a Dalek, and after it came face to face with the Doctor, it broke out wreaking havoc. After the episode's resolution, Rose Tyler requested for the Doctor to allow Adam to join them in their travels. The Doctor was, well, less than enthusiastic about it, but he eventually accepted. The trio travelled to Satellite 5 in the year 200,000. In the following episode, The Long Game, where the human race had been completely manipulated by an alien creature known as the Mighty Jagrafes of the Holy Hadrajasic Maxrodonopho. Holy shit, that was a whole mouthful. Anyway, this creature, with the funding of a consortium of banks, were controlling Earth's population through the microchips implanted in everyone's head, entirely shaping their economy, news, and immigration, generating constant fear throughout the human race without them even being aware. Adam had only one trip in the TARDIS and ended up pissing off the Doctor by trying to pull a Marty McFly with the Sports Almanac, except Adam goes a lot more extreme than Marty did in Back to the Future, undertaking a surgical procedure, placing a hole directly in his forehead called an infospike, which allowed Adam to have access to all computers on Satellite 5 and download large amounts of information about the 21st century. He created the template of what not to do if you happen to travel with the Doctor. Now, Adam is probably one of the most unlikable companions from the RTD era, and you can really totally see why. He's annoying, a lot of the time he just floats in the background of the episodes, and even though his character was an intellectual genius, he made for one hell of a stupid decision, becoming completely overwhelmed by the technology in the future, with his own greed and selfishness resulting in the Doctor dropping him back off on Earth. He's quite easy to forget, which makes him perfect for this list. Dodo Chaplet. Dorothea Ann Chaplet, mainly known by the name Dodo, and played by Jackie Lane, encountered the first Doctor in 1965, having accidentally mistaken the TARDIS for a real police box towards the end of the story, The Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, also simply known as The Massacre. Dodo, the Doctor, and Stephen Taylor travelled 10 million years into the future, arriving on a Generation starship which was carrying the last of humanity away from Earth. Dodo accidentally infects the ship with the common cold, and the ship's entire occupants have no immunity to it and start to die. I mean, ain't that a bitch? 10 million years in the future and humanity still hasn't found a cure for the common cold. But the Doctor is able to create a vaccine in time to save everyone and leaves in the TARDIS. But just when you think the story's all over, the TARDIS rematerializes on the same ship, only 700 years later, where it seems that there was a second wave of the cold virus, and it had a genetic weakness which allowed the servants of the humans, the monoids, to rise up against the humans, becoming their masters. It's actually one of those rare times where the Doctor being there creates this whole situation, and I guess if Dodo didn't have one of those 24-hour colds, it probably would have been a different story. Dodo, the Doctor, and Stephen would then go on to face the Toymaker and be forced to play a series of deadly games in order to escape from his domain. She would later travel to the Wild West and meet Doc Holliday in the town of Tombstone in the story The Gunfighters. Please, for the love of God, do not fucking sing that song one more time. After the gunfighters, the crew went into the future, meeting a bunch of savages that were forcibly having their life force drained in order to sustain the rulers of the planet, the Elders. She departed in the next story, The War Machines, in what is probably the weakest departure for a companion ever, where we don't even see her say goodbye to the Doctor. She just disappears from the story after episode 2, and the Doctor is told that she's decided to stay on Earth from the 2 new characters introduced in the story, Ben and Polly. Dodo is just kind of plain. She's an ordinary girl from the mid-60s, that's about it. She could play the piano and was knowledgeable about plants. She could be naive at times and make some really dumb choices. And then there's that whole thing with her accent changing, but yeah, overall, just a bit bland and very forgettable. But the character was given some redemption in the Doctor Who book Who Killed Kennedy, which is a fantastic book, which I highly recommend. It's completely out of print now, but if you can get your hands on it, it's totally worth it. Harry Sullivan. Alright, I'm technically cheating with this one. Harry is not forgotten. I can guarantee people in the comments are going to be like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Harry is more memorable, 100 times more memorable than any character on this list. And yeah, alright. He's not forgotten. But I would say he's often overlooked. This, I would say, is more of an honourable mention. Harry is really overshadowed by a lot more memorable companions from the Tom Baker era, like Sarah Jane, K9, Leela, and Romana too. So in that sense, he kind of is forgotten in a mix of really popular and more memorable companions in a great era. Harry Sullivan made his first appearance in the Fourth Doctor's debut story, Robot. Played by Ian Marter, Sergeant Lieutenant Harry Sullivan was Unit's chief medical officer and was responsible for caring for the newly regenerated Fourth Doctor. But the Doctor proved that he was more than capable of taking care of himself.
Here, Doctor, you're not fit.
Not fit, not fit. Of course I'm fit. All systems go.
Harry also aided the Doctor and the Brigadier in taking down Professor Kettlewell's K1 robot, which Kettlewell and the Scientific Reform Society used to steal nuclear missile codes from Russia, China, and America, in the hopes of using them if the world's governments didn't give in to their demands. Maybe they should think about joining Spectre. I mean, James Bond versus the K1 robot? Hell, I would pay to see that, who wouldn't? Harry travelled with the Doctor and Sarah Jane for several adventures. He would see the future of the human race on the space station Nerva, where it became infested with the insectoid Wirran creatures. He would battle against a Sontaran warrior called Styre, and would later return to the space station again with the Doctor and Sarah 1,000 years before they were last there, fighting off the Cybermen as the Cybermen tried to attack the planet Voga. He was even there for the birth of the Daleks, facing against the Daleks' creator Davros, in his first debut story, The Genesis of the Daleks. Eventually, Harry decided to stay on Earth after his encounter with the shape-shifting alien Zygons, but he would later make another appearance in the android invasion, as he aided the Doctor and Sarah defeating the rhino-like alien creatures called the Kralls, preventing them from invading Earth. Harry was a mild-mannered English gentleman, and he was always willing to explore, had this confidence about him. He was brave at times, and he was rather handy with a cricket ball, and even on occasion would make the dumb decision.
Harry Sullivan is an imbecile!
Harry was a great companion, but never really had much to do. He was often sidelined most of the time, with more material going to Sarah Jane. And that's kind of why his character was written out, but as a companion, I've always liked him. Katarina. Katarina, played by Adrian Hill, was a slave girl from ancient Troy, who was originally sent by the prophetess Cassandra to spy on the Doctor and his companions, Stephen and Vicky, believing them to be Greek spies that would cause certain doom for Troy. And I mean, well, in a way, they actually did, with the Doctor giving the idea to the Greek king of Ithaca, Odysseus, to build the Trojan horse. She soon befriended the Doctor, Stephen and Vicky, and decided to join them in their adventures after Troy had fallen and Vicky had decided to stay behind. But unfortunately, Katarina didn't actually last all that long, after the TARDIS had brought the group to the planet Kemble in the Daleks' master plan. In the story, the Doctor discovers that the Daleks have formed an alliance with multiple alien races in a plan to conquer the solar system with their new superweapon called the Time Destructor, a weapon capable of annihilating all life by rapidly accelerating time. In episode 4 of the story, when the Doctor, Stephen, and the character Brett take off in a spaceship heading for Earth in an effort to warn humanity about the Daleks, Katarina was taken hostage by the criminal Kirkson, pulling her into an airlock and demanding that they land the ship immediately. But to ensure that her friends would make it to Earth, Katarina sacrificed herself by activating the airlock hatch, resulting in both her and Kirkson being sucked out into space. Katarina as a character was primitive. The Doctor would always have to explain things to her, but she would always follow his instructions and would constantly refer to the Doctor as a god, which is, I guess, the sort of thing you'd expect to see from someone from ancient Troy, coming face to face with an alien that can travel in time. But she just kind of blends into the background a lot of the time and has very little to do in the one episode that she's introduced in The Mythmakers and in those first 4 episodes of the Daleks' Master Plan as well. She was actually the first ever companion to die in the show's history. Yeah, and that only happened because the producer John Wiles and the production team soon realised just how challenging it would be to write for someone from her time period that had to have every single thing explained to them. And unfortunately, there's only one single episode that exists today featuring Katarina. Episode 2, aka The Day of Armageddon from the Daleks' Master Plan. And because of this, and a combination of her character really lacking depth, I think she's quite easily forgotten. Sarah Kingdom. Okay, so it's going to be up to you whether or not you actually include Sarah Kingdom as a companion. I mean, I do, because she does have not just the adventure with the Daleks. In between that, episode 7, aka The Feast of Stephen, is a pretty much separate episode from that entire story, and is Doctor Who's first ever Christmas special. So I've always counted her as a companion. Sarah Kingdom, played by the wonderful Jean Marsh, was a member of the Space Security Service, a military-style organization that protected the solar system against the threat of alien menace. She was tasked by the Guardian of the Solar System, Mavic Chen, to hunt down the Doctor and retrieve the core of the Time Destructor, a vital piece of the superweapon that the Doctor had stolen. Little did Sarah know, though, that Mavic Chen was actually in league with the Daleks. He actually ends up convincing her to kill her own brother Brett, believing him to be a traitor. Sarah Kingdom was a very headstrong, independent female character who was intelligent, confident, and someone that was not only very dedicated but extremely good at her job, starting off very ruthless as she tries to hunt down the Doctor. But then she realizes the truth about Mavic Chen actually working with the Daleks, and then befriends the Doctor and Stephen and aids them in trying to stop the Daleks. But she was also given quite a few adventures beyond this in expanded media. Yeah, I know I said I wasn't going to be including expanded media, but I just wanted to highlight some things. The Companion Chronicles, the 3 Companion Chronicles featuring Sarah Kingdom, are actually quite good. I know that she has a lot more adventures off on her own and even with the First Doctor, but those 3 Companion Chronicles I think are great. She probably has the most horrific death scene for a companion ever. The Doctor ends up going back to the planet Kemble, stealing and activating the Time Destructor, aging the Daleks to death. Whilst trying to escape as the planet begins to rapidly age, the Doctor and Sarah also begin aging as they're caught in the Time Destructor's field. Sarah ends up dying, actually turning to dust before she's able to make it back to the TARDIS. And she's only in, 9 episodes of the Daleks' Master Plan? And that includes the Feast of Stephen, even though I don't like to include that, but for argumentative sakes, I'll include it anyway. But if more episodes of that story existed, I can guarantee you she would get more recognition. But the way she's introduced as essentially an antagonist to the Doctor and Stephen is uniquely interesting. I don't even think we've ever seen a companion that starts off as a villain that transitions through that entire course of the story and develops and grows as a character and becomes actually really likable. That is so interesting to me, and then it makes it all the more devastating when she actually dies. Chameleon. Yes, I think this is the number 1 companion that is easily the most forgettable. John Nathan Turner thought that this would be the new K9, and oh boy, did he soon realise that he was wrong. Chameleon was this shape-shifting robot voiced by Gerald Flood, and introduced in the 5th Doctor's story, The King's Demons. In the story, the Doctor and his companions Tegan and Turlough arrive at an English castle in 1215, where King John is attempting to collect more taxes from its owner, Sir Ranulph Fitzwilliam. But the Doctor knows his history and realises that something is wrong. It seems that the Master is at work here, trying to alter history by using a shape-shifting robot called Chameleon that he found in one of his travels, to impersonate the king in order to prevent the signing of Magna Carta. The Doctor freed Chameleon from the Master's control, and the robot came to travel with the TARDIS crew for almost the entirety of the 5th Doctor's last season. However, in all those following stories, the 5 Doctors, the Warriors of the Deep, Resurrection of the Daleks, The Awakening, and Frontios, Chameleon is never actually seen. He's completely forgotten. He appears briefly in a deleted scene in The Awakening.
What are you doing?
Furthering my education. Learning about the TARDIS.
But that's it until we get to the Planet of Fire. I like to think that Chameleon just got lost in the corridors of the TARDIS and was just completely forgotten by Tegan, Turlough, and the Doctor. I mean, it's either that or he was just stored in a broom cupboard.
Hello? Is there anybody there? Hello?
Chameleon met his end when he brought the TARDIS to the planet Sarn under the control of the Master, who had accidentally shrunken himself and was trying to restore himself to normal size. However, the Doctor manages to weaken the Master's control over Chameleon, where the robot then begs for the Doctor to kill him, which he obliges. The producer, John Nathan Turner, wanted to have a robot in the show, this canine-like character, and saw this thing that was created by Mike Power and co-created by Chris Padmore, and decided to put it in the show.
John came to me fairly early on in the 20th season and said to me that we're very exciting, we're going to get a real robot later in the series.
The robot was very much working from the waist upwards. It had lots and lots of movements, but from the waist upwards. There were designs to make it walk and make it do all kinds of things, but it was really light years away from that kind of development at that time in the 80s. So it was kind of impractical to think it would go in that direction, but I was looking along those lines.
Chameleon was actually only killed off because the prop was just so excruciatingly difficult to use, and there were so many limitations to what it could and couldn't achieve, and it was just too ambitious. That, and the fact that the creator, Mike Power, tragically died in a boating accident, which pretty much sealed the deal of them wanting to write out Chameleon entirely. I think Chameleon might be the worst companion in the show's history. He has nothing to him, no depth, no character, nothing. It was this advanced robot that could easily take on other forms. As a concept, I think, having this shape-shifting alien robot that can disguise itself as anyone or anything, that's a really awesome idea. The problem was, the prop could barely articulate any movement, and this was never going to be convincing at all, even on a 1983 budget. And hey, I like both the King's Demons and the Planet of Fire, probably the King's Demons more than a lot of other people do, but I just think it really should have been a man in a suit, like Marvin the Robot from The Hitchhiker's Guide. I think that would have been a lot more convincing. I think Chameleon is really quite easily forgotten. The only story where he's traveling with them as a companion is the one where he dies. There never felt like there was a relationship forged with any of the TARDIS crew or Chameleon. He just really lacked depth and was almost a characterless character. If you ask a Doctor Who fan, oh, do you remember that robot companion the Doctor had? Naturally their first response would be, oh yeah, K9. And you'd be like, no, I mean Chameleon. And I mean, unless you're a sad, hardcore classic Doctor Who fan like me, you're not going to know who Chameleon is. I mean, that's the extent of his impact in the show. And that's my list. But let me know what you think are the most forgotten companions. Maybe it's one I didn't even mention. Be sure to tell me in the comments below. I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a like on the video. That way more people can see it. But you've been watching The Who View. I hope to see you next time, but bye for now.